Hello, Wargamers, and welcome to the show. Tonight we have a special guest, a gamer who has been playing Wargames since the 80s, starting with Warhammer, and is getting back into the scene more recently with new rules and new campaign ideas. You may have seen his recent tweet thread where he shows his effort at playing a Featherstone scenario with Middle-earth role-playing random event charts. Please welcome Demitri to the show.
Hi, folks. Thanks for having me on the show, Stephen. Hopefully, what I have to say will be of benefit to some of you.
I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will. Why don't we start off with you sharing a little bit more about yourself?
I remember back, I think it was a fighting fantasy novel. Pick up a book and read it at school. So I rifled through and I picked it up because it looked really interesting. There was something going on at the front. And I flicked through and I thought, hey, this isn't reading. This is a game. I need a dice. And there was no dice at school. But fortunately, I could take it home and get a dice off my dad's backgammon set and play through it. I died a ton of times. But there was either an advert in the back of it for White Dwarf, because at the time, I think they were sort of doing the role play side and the book side, and their own stuff was just coming through. So I managed to find a White Dwarf, then the figures, then it all completely spiraled out of control, and here I am many moons later, still enjoying the hobby.
All right, the spiral out of control. That's awesome.
Oh, from Club D&D, AD&D, Warhammer, the old school realm of chaos was played to death round a friend's place, where it was on the floor, big bit of hardboard, put on the scenery, and the way you rolled, and whatever happened.
That sounds like a lot of fun. What types of games are you normally playing today?
Nowadays, I've got 3 children. I don't have much time, so I've gone for the really quick fire rules. There's a lovely game by Bob Cordery. Sorry, I'm sorry, I might have got the name wrong. Cordery. It's portable wargaming, and that's really interesting because it's on a square grid based system, so you don't need any measurements, measuring sticks. So. And it's just so quick fire. I think I've actually used it for replaying some battles of the Afghan War, Second Afghan War, back in 1800s. And so I normally go for colonial because I'm rebuilding everything, like my collection of miniatures and also the library to go with it. So I picked it because it was the most interesting to me.
Right, and that's actually a big topic of discussion recently regarding bringing in new players to the hobby. And there's a lot of discussion about what games are interesting to what players. And it's definitely, there's so many eras and so many genres and so many times and places that you can play that I personally don't understand why anyone would think there's any sort of barrier to getting involved with the hobby, because you can literally play.
That's right. There's got to be an interest in something.
Nowadays, whatever there's a word game for it. And the only barrier to entry probably is, if you on a game or something like that. But like you said, the portable wargamer, I've got that book. I haven't read it completely. The campaign book club book report series starting soon. But yeah, it looks amazing, and I'm glad that I have you as a resource for tapping when I do get around.
Yeah, it is such a comfortable close. After you've played through it a couple of times, you'll see it's simple, but you've still got a bit of tactical edge, even though it's on a square grid-based system or a hex. He accommodates hexes as well, Cordery, and it's a wonderful short burst of fun. If you're short on time, it's just such a easy game to set up. fire out whatever scenario you've got in your mind.
Based on your interest in the colonial period, is that what influenced you to choose the scenario from the Featherstone book?
Yeah, most definitely. Most definitely. You don't, I haven't seen, I've seen like one colonial bash in around about 6 magazines that I've picked up. So you don't see them very often to pick up. And that Donald Featherstone book was, I don't know if you've got them in the States. They're just second-hand shops where people take their stuff for reselling. So that was like finding gold for me. Constantly going in, not every day, but every so often, with a side-on head, if you can imagine, coming out with a crooked neck every
Right.
time I've ever gone in, and just to see Donald Featherstone, well, that got snapped up. Well, after I pushed my chin back up to close my mouth, a bit of shock finding it. Actually, they don't turn up that often, but yeah, the interest in the colonial definitely spurred the interest on that particular part of the Sikh War.
All right. And so then what was the obstacle? Because you mentioned there was an obstacle in your tweet thread. So what inspired you to look away, I guess, or maybe I should go back. In order to play that scenario, what rule set did you want to use? And then where did you run into problems so you grabbed the Middle Earth role playing?
This is the thing. When you read through that scenario in its entirety, a really small force being able to beat a really big force, and no war games from when he was writing that it wouldn't accommodate for it, because we're so used to having, well, apart from if it's Neil Thomas rules, like the 1 hour rules, they're all over the place. There's different size forces, there's different size units. Any true pointage wargaming game wouldn't allow for a victory at all, because they'd just be swamped.
I think a lot of modern games are very much based on the idea of a balanced force. And so it becomes perhaps more winning is more according to the whims of the dice
Yeah,
than, or maybe upon generalship. But I think that mostly the new, especially the current day games that we play, they're very much based on a balanced force, and it's just whoever wins is going to be random.
yeah, definitely. There was there wouldn't have been uh there wouldn't have been that scope. That I was looking for that scope of, they've done really well, gone beyond what they needed to, or they've done really poorly. They've done really that is a complete fumble. Do you know what I'm saying? I needed that to happen, or a possibility of that to happen.
Right, absolutely, yeah, and you need it to follow a narrative and not necessarily enforce a narrative,
Yep,
and definitely a story will come out of it, a story will emerge, but you need to have a framework based on starting conditions where, one side is much more powerful.
that's right. Yep, definitely. That's basically the problem. Yeah, Portugal would have played it through, and it would have been good. Neil Thomas rule set, I could have played it through, and it would have been good. But would it have given me the same kind of simulation? I guess I was after a simulation of that battle rather than a war game of that battle.
Okay, that makes sense. So what made you grab the MERP rules?
MERP has a really interesting thing, and when I first thought of it, it's that open-ended role. If you haven't played MERP, it's D100. It's how they handle that D100. It's not purely, it's not a percentile system. It can go up and down in grades, and then that is graded. So the result is graded in many, many, many ways. It's either you're rolling too low, you not only failed, but you have a chance of a complete blunder. You could give the opposition a complete edge from how much you're rolling down. And then the other end of the spectrum is you can roll so high that you're doing something completely absurd. So it gives the scope of a really, really poor commander actually coming up with something quite special on the battlefield.
And that's what you needed in order to balance scenario.
I thought it interested me how I could bend it for the simulation, if that makes sense. I really thought that it could accommodate for a balance instead of a whitewash. There is this chance that something special could happen, if that kind of makes sense, because there's scope in there.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So now what was the base rule set that you were using to use this scenario? Or did you just take the MERP charts and turn that into a rule set for the simulation?
So basically, I've taken the MERP charts and used them for the rule set, but I had to do a lot of footwork. I was combining them as a rule set with what Featherstone had written for the scenario. And the reason why I had to do it this way is because I had to take the steps that he gave from 10 a.m., the start of the battle proper, to the end of the battle. So it kind of went along with his written simulation of how the battle went. So, but by doing that, I could represent the support of the cavalry, the orders that were actually issued. I could resolve firing back, combats, how the defender would receive the combat, and all, and the outcome of the engagements that were gonna happen down the line.
All right, that makes sense. So then how did this all work out for you? Can you give us kind of a blow by blow?
Yeah, I can. I have my results here. Bear in mind, I've only had the chance of doing 8 battles, and I pushed the boat out as well for you guys because I done another 8 battles, but we'll get on to that. So the initial 8 battles. So my story of the Battle of Alawal is, given these rules set, out of the 8 battles, there were 2 instances that the Brits didn't make it, and the reasoning behind that is the opposition's reaction to the right flank move, because they moved right first and hit some, let's say, unreliable sort of hillman tribes first, because the Sikhs were more in the center with the cannon, and they brought the rest up slowly, but they kind of got bogged down by the cannon. They lost quite a few people, to the point where I think a commanding officer laid down with them and spurred them on. So once that was achieved, the right would come swinging back and cut off their line of retreat. At that point, at any point in time, the Sikhs are allowed to or gain the upper hand and re-maneuver themselves on the other town. Most of the time, it was a foot slog to get there, but twice the Brits performed really well, and the plan went seamlessly from as written. I was really quite happy with how it panned out. They got repulsed the once though, so they lost once, and that's when the Sikh commander. Bear in mind, he's as commanders go, he's under. So he hit his results, he hit his absurd, and he wheeled his men round and said, "We fight here," and that was it. No win for the Brits.
No, that's interesting. Now, how did you determine the leadership value, or what kind of quality the commanders had?
I tried a really tricky version, which is pouring through. Bear in mind, I'm just using MERP. I'm not using Rollmaster, so it's less of a trawl. I went through and worked out what you needed as a commander, presence wise and etc. etc. And then I thought to myself, this is supposed to be fun. What the hell are you doing? So I went straight to what Featherstone said the troops and the command rating was and the plan rating was, for straight from his write up. And I thought there's got to be a way of setting this. And I thought, brilliant, I've got it. Static maneuver table. The static maneuver table grades from partial success to near success to absolute success, and that was my starting modification for whatever was going to happen. So the Brits are moving up that right flank. They've got to be quick up that right flank because they've got to assault the first village as quickly as possible so the cavalry can swing around to cut off the line of retreat. So if it's an absolute success, that's going to affect the troops' movement on the move maneuver table. And depending on what troop it is, say if it's the cavalry trying to wing round, now that's, I think I assessed it as a medium difficulty move maneuver. So they would dice down and get their movement points from whatever they cross-referenced on the medium. And then yet again with the troops, if they were the light, freer moving Gurkhas, they would probably get a light for making it up to the town, whereas the more regimented Sikhs would probably be a medium to keep up and get to the town. So depending on the success on that table for the commanders in there, depended on how many bonuses and how difficult it would be for the troops to get there.
Do you have anything else you'd like to share about this battle and how it went down?
Yeah, actually. I actually played it through with Featherstone's colonial rules for you. And the results were really, really interesting. Really interesting. Now, in Featherstone's rules, the natives react in a completely different way because they're not fighting like line of column, line, volley fire. They're not fighting like that. They're fighting tribal. So they're getting tests to conduct melee, to stand there still, to react back. If they don't, they're falling back. Force the right because of the tribal contingent. When you hit the center to left, that was the hard fight. And the only way that it still depended on the commander realizing and rolling back to the other village, but with the Featherstone system, there was more chance of success for the British force, all because of how the native hill tribes worked on the right hand side. The hill tribes on the right had to throw to stand their ground, had to throw to actually engage in a melee to defend themselves, or they were just going to get pushed back, which led to the British being able to wing it round to cut off their escape route, because there's a camp above there as well, a camp where they were going to meet up and flee back across the river if everything was going wrong. They were basically getting encircled from the right. I'm really happy with Featherstone's rules, and I am setting up for some playtests and a possible campaign, an imaginations campaign with the Featherstone rules, hopefully with a drawn map, hopefully see how that goes. But as always, we've got a collection of figures waiting to get based and painted for them, and I want to see how far I can push Featherstone's rules, because they seem to get, and they're pretty damn quick as well.
Awesome. That's good. That's good. Quick rules are very good.
Oh, it has to be. Has to be quick. Small scale. Well, it doesn't have, just because you're on a 2x2 board with 10 mil figures, it doesn't have to be skirmish all the time. You can actually represent. How many did I represent on the last one? Tens of thousands, and you can actually really represent that. I know it's all figure ratio stuff. You're actually playing quite a big battle on a small surface area in a short amount of time, and that's just a fantastic thing to be able to do.
Right, right. On that same note, if you have some time
Yeah,
away from the kids, there is a game that I recently started playing called Age of Penda, and it
Age of
is
Pen.
Penda, yeah, and it's
Yeah.
really fast and it's nuanced and it's very deep. It uses a tactics chart where you choose your tactics before the turn,
Hmm.
and you get to choose four activities for yourself, and then four, your opponent chooses four, and so and you can play them out in any order, but that is what you chose for that turn. So depending on the actions of your opponent, maybe one of your tactics is wasted, or maybe it's super effective, and it's remarkable, and I'm really, really enjoying it. I played my campaign carnival scenario with it, and it only took a half an hour to run, which I was pretty impressed with.
That's pretty quick. That's pretty quick. I saw you setting it up on YouTube. It did pique an interest. It does look really interesting. It's all the offset square, isn't it? I kind of
Right.
like the look of that.
Yeah.
I think I might have to pick it up. You may have swayed me a little bit on that
Mhm.
one.
Yeah, I think you can get the book print on demand. So if you've got a print on demand source there, you should be able to get it pretty quick, or you can get the PDF, inexpensive.
Yeah, yeah.
The only thing that's tricky is making the game board to play on. I got fancy, and I had picked up art canvas boards that were on clearance at a store. I got four boards or three boards for $8, something like that. It was super cheap.
Super
So I
cheap.
just grabbed them, and then I painted them green and brown, and then took a Sharpie and drew the Sharpie.